All right. Shalom. First and foremost, I would like to give all praise and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Makakwadash, and double honors unto the apostles and the elders of GMS who rule well, teach well, being great examples towards younger brothers, and peace and blessing and salutation to the hopeful elect out there pushing his word and truth and in sincerity across the four winds in the name of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Makakwadash, pushing to get up out of there. Shalom to the hopeful elect, the believers, the listeners, whom have came back to the obedience of the scriptures through faith in Yahweh by Shema Shai. And what I want to get into with this lesson is don't miss the meeting. All right, don't miss this meeting. Now you got in, the business world, even in the work world, let's say you work in, the higher you get up in, management, in any business or any corporation, you go from being hands-on and laboring to being in, mostly meetings. You get to be in the meetings all day where you discuss the vision, the goals, the tedious things of, the company. You spend a lot of time in meeting, going to meeting after meeting after meeting. Okay, so in this truth, as the Lord has brought us into, all right, leadership, okay, within the ministry, well, we are, our day is full of meetings, you see, in the spirit, because first you have, the apostles and elders, that are still teaching strong, their weekly videos, their, their live streams, their camps, and as we watch these, videos, it's like being in, spiritual meeting. Okay? Now we can't watch, every single video, man, because, they on fire, the whole, body. A lot of brothers on fire. Okay, but we watch what we can, but for sure we don't get to watch much, because, schedule. All right. Being in the loop, okay, of the apostles and elders, is vital. You see, because they set the tone for the body, So watching the apostles and elders and then, watching other brothers and, you see, weekly is like being in those meetings, you being in the loop, being informed, getting those spiritual gems and nuggets and how to move in our day to day. Because when you read the scriptures, it goes to Sirach 8:8, it said, despise not the discourse of the wise, but acquaint thyself with their proverbs, for of them thou shalt learn instructions in how to serve great men with ease. You see? So it said, despise not it's like the discourse of the wise. It says, but acquaint thyself with their proverbs, for of them thou shalt learn instruction in how to serve great men with ease. Because when you look at the apostles, these men, have been here 40 years plus now. Okay? And that's a lot of experience in the truth. That's a lot of experience in this truth, man. And they're constantly dropping what gems and proverbs that you get from experience. Of course they break down, the scriptures and go into, the history, the words, the accounts, and, they go into everything. You see? And one thing that they have that, can't be duplicated is their experience in this thing. Okay? And as we're watching these men, we're learning how to serve. We're learning how to deal. You see, we're learning perspectives of, experience in this truth, man. You see? So it's like a meeting that we attend. Okay? In the spirit. Let's go from there, because we know that, we go into edification, which means to build up. So when we go into these spiritual meetings, not even, and then even, beyond the apostles and elders, just being in tune with, what's happening amongst the body, watching brothers, lessons and, being in tune with the body. Okay? There's always a lot going on, and we carve out what we can. The thing is about consistency, because like I said, you can't watch, it's impossible to watch every video. Okay? But the thing is being consistent and making these meetings in the spirit. You want to attend, these meetings. Okay? And be in the loop. You see? Understanding how things are moving. Certain orders go out, during time the apostles teaching, certain orders go out. You see? It's something about, catching certain orders live, like, oh, and then you can tell the spirit working. You see? I remember watching that live. I never forget when the apostles in the spirit, Apostle Hart, he was reading in the book of Hebrews, and that's when he spoke about what teaching daily. Okay? It was like, man, it's like you was at a meeting. And you got the protocol for moving forward, man. You see? So we want to be in tune with these spiritual meetings, because it's easy to get complacent. Speaking to myself first and foremost, it's easy to get complacent, caught up on our own thing, but no, we gotta, hey, make these meetings. And it look different for every brother, because every brother time and schedule is different. Some brothers can listen to videos on the job, some brothers can't. They make a big difference. You see? But we have to schedule in, because even go to meetings get scheduled in. You see? So we have to schedule these things in and make it a priority, man. All right, so let's go from there. And let's get this in the book of Revelation, because another meeting that we have is when we read. Okay? When we read, okay, it's like a meeting with Yahushua. Like you having to sit down there one-on-one with Yahushua. Okay? That's why you go to Revelation 1 and 3. It says, blessed is he that readeth, and they that hear the words of prophecy, and keep those things which are written therein, for the time is at hand. So blessed is he that readeth, and they that hear the words of this prophecy, man. Because reading, like I say, that's that one-on-one with Yahushua. And no matter how many times we read the scriptures, we can always pull something new from it. And there's still certain things that, I read, especially like dealing with prophecy, man, and it just tie in to it explain exactly what, because let's say I, been watching and following something in prophecy, what's happening in the news, geopolitics or whatever, and then I can read something, okay, in the book of Jeremiah, and it explains exactly what's happening in geopolitics, and it's like, man, you see, but that's Yahushua dealing. That's Yahushua dealing. Like, here you go, little bro. Take this with you. Add this to what you got going on. Take this with you, little bro. And this what's happening. You see? So it's like that one-on-one meeting, that intimate setting. There's nothing that replaces reading. Especially when you're able to, we got the tools to go into words, and you got the Google, the chat, the Edom Online, the G&T. We got all these tools to really tap in. So reading is vital, man. It's needed, and it doesn't take, these marathon study sessions. You see, you can take one precept and look into some words, and it sends you down a rabbit hole of understanding. You can dissect one precept a day, and then we'll be adding to our spiritual arsenal, man. You get one precept, dissect it, go into certain words, go into, okay, what was happening when this was said, go into the backdrop of, and add to our spiritual arsenal, man. Okay, and it's a meeting with Yahweh Shai. You see, and we're keeping the things which are written, which it was prophesied for us to teach. Okay, it was prophesied for us to come back to our power, to call upon the name of our power. Okay, these things were prophesied, man. You know, to the camps. These things were prophesied. Okay, so let's go here. Let's get this in Revelation 3. We can end it here. It's Revelation 3 and 20. It says, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice and open the door, I will come in to him and will sup with him, and he with me." And sup goes into supper, which, that was the highlight meal of the day. And a lot of things happened over supper. Heavy, conversations went down over supper. You go into it. Let's get it real quick. Should have looked it up before. Let's see. Let's see if it give us something. Cool. Let's see, Revelation. So I'm just asking it, the cultural background of supper in ancient Israel. Let's see. I should have looked it up before. Going to the Lord's Supper. It might give us something. AI overview it, man. God damn. Oh, yeah, it's tripping today with Google, man. No AI overview. What is the cultural? Because you go into those suppers, like I say, there was an intimate thing. When I say business was discussed, agreements was made, heavy, secrets were told, the happenings, what was going on. It was a lot went down, you know, um, during supper, man. It was a very intimate meal, to have someone over, for supper. Okay, that was an intimate setting. Intimate goes into being familiar. Okay, but I'm gonna try one more look up and Google it. I don't even want to go all the way into the chat. I do that another day. So what is the cultural background? It says in ancient Israel, supper was far more than a routine evening meal. It was a deeply symbolic, sacred space of conventional bonding, social identity, and ritual purity. And it's heavy because it says a deeply symbolic, all right, sacred space of conventional bonding. Because it's like hanging out with Yahushua. It's like hanging out with our forefathers. You read about King David's like all these stories and Joseph, and you're reading these stories, man. It's like, you're back there with our forefathers, man. We're bonding with them. We see, okay, now we know, like, okay, this is where they was coming from. You see, we see the situation they was in and how they played it, and it add to us, man. These things add to us, man. We're bonding with this book. You see, and it says a sacred space of conventional bonding, social identity, and ritual purity. Which this word is cleansing us. When you read this word and then apply, it's cleansing us. Okay, it says operating within a distinct Middle Eastern framework of hospitality and honor, the act of breaking bread together established, all right, implicit peace treaties and divine fellowship. Okay, we're having divine fellowship with Yahushua as we read, man. It said the cultural background of this vital, daily, and festive practice can be understood through its social, dietary, and religious, all right, dimensions. It says covenantal dining. It says to invite someone to eat at your table signified a covenant like bond of mutual protection, peace, and goodwill. All right. Conversely, being excluded from a table meant public rejection. Man, that's 2/3 that can't get it. They've been excluded from the table. They can't sit down and eat in the spirit. They can't sit down and digest his word. They've been excluded. Okay? So, man, that's heavy, But I know just going into that supper, it was a heavy, custom behind, having supper with someone, So we're being able to sup with Yahushua daily, man. We have the privilege to do that, Revelation 3:20 says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice and open the door, I will come in to him and will sup with him, and he with me. To him that overcometh will I grant to sit with me in my throne, even also as I also overcame and am set down with my Father in his throne, man. So these meetings are putting us in position, to sit in rulership, in places of rulership, man. You see people talk about, their mentors and their success coaching. Well, what bigger success coach than Yahweh Bashim Al-Shai? Plus, the men that he set up as leaders, man, in these last days, man. Okay? You see? So, hey, man, we're in these meetings, man, and we're, getting the goals, the visions, the will of the Father, the way, the direction that things are going. Okay? And it's putting us in position, all right, to be joint heirs of Baratazar, man, as we going, to these meetings, man. Hey, so don't miss that meeting, man. Speaking to myself, first and foremost. So Lord will, you brothers, all right, and you few sisters edified. Till next time I say Shalom, Kwam Yashala, Abba, Abba, soon, Shalom.